Yuck, it's weird. My velvety voice. Sounds good, Chris. Welcome back, everybody, to Best Concordia Podcast. I'm your host, Johnny B., and we are coming to you live from the Ethnography Lab here on a chilly Friday night in Montreal. And we have a very special episode today, which we are calling Adjusting and Tinkering, featuring the musical stylings of Willem Burnaby, who wrote that atmospheric little ditty we're listening to right now. This fall, I had the pleasure of attending a workshop here in the Ethnography Lab called Design in the Making, Design and Ethnography. And the workshop was all about how ethnography might support or be integrated into the design process, and was organized by two visiting scholars from the Technical University of Munich, master students Florian, Tichy, and Verena Eireiner, and myself and co-host Anne-Marie Turcotte sat down with them and got the lowdown about how the workshop came to be.
We were traveling here in March of this year, where we met with some members of the ethnography lab here in Concordia, and we just sat down for 5 minutes, and that's when we basically decided that we should have some sort of collaboration, and that's when we thought of the workshop, because me spending some time in the industry gave me a good idea for current design practices. And of course, the ethnography lab has extensive knowledge about ethnography. So we were looking for a material component in ethnography and a storytelling or narration practices in design, because we thought that they could mutually benefit from each other. I experienced that firsthand because when I did managed a design process for an Internet of Things innovation back when I was working at the industry job, I also did an ethnography, and I could tell that this reflexive component had a huge impact on how I thought about the design process and all the different actors and also the materiality of it.
So this was part of your job. You were working for this company and you were managing a project.
It was kind of strange. I arrived there and my boss told me, well, we have this problem, power tools, really expensive power tools, they get stolen a lot. And it's really hurting the construction companies. So we need to find some kind of fix. Can you think of something? And it was really...
Fix the problem.
That's what I did. I thought, I thought a lot about GPS and GSM and how that works. So I was able to put a little gadget together to go into the field. It was only possible in Great Britain, interestingly, because, data protection law is kind of strict in Germany. So we did some field testing in the UK, and we found out that it really works. But it opened up a huge array of privacy concerns, especially for construction workers, that I thought we really needed to be mindful of. And I could tell that my perspective, there was less a managerial one, more of a social science perspective. Also, I come from a long line of handymen, so I really felt for those handymen who were basically being tracked through their power tools and their everyday activities, and really throughout the day, from the moment they started their trucks, which they transport their tools with, through the task they would do with the tools, because the tracker would be able to detect current. So you could tell from the tracker data how the tool was used and if it was used properly. So this really concerned me. It was, now looking back, studying science and technology studies was the only logical consequence from this experience. I think tracking tools is not the problem, but how we handle it and how we design it in care and respect of those who use those objects is very important.
Absolutely. And so you kind of did this, was it an informal ethnography, or were they asking you like specifically to do an ethnography as part of the solution, coming up with a solution to this problem?
I wrote a long report on the ethical implications of that said product. So yes, but not all managerial levels of that company were on board with me that that's really a problem, because if you can collect data, why not just do it? I mean, we don't know right now how to monetize that, but better collect it right now. Maybe we can think of something. So there was one common notion that really shocked me. Yeah.
Interesting. So, and then Florian, how about, can you tell us a little bit about the talk that you gave at the workshop?
Yeah, so there's two kinds of sources for the talk. I've talked about prototyping, and it was influenced by some work I did for the chair of Sociology of Science, which is also linked to the institute we're studying at. I did a project on prototyping there that is in a wider context of projects on maker culture. The other thing is I have a background as, I do lay pedagogy for ministries, and
what is that?
I started out as an altar boy some years ago, which sounds pretty strange, but Bavaria is kind of conservative in that sense.
Very Catholic.
Yeah.
At least in the area we're from. Yeah.
In the celebration, most of all. So, and I got a group of little children that were also going to be altar boys and altar girls, and I was somehow responsible then. So I got to a course where I learned the skills to be responsible for them. And some years later, I was asked if I want to do that myself, training other people to do group leading in that context. And it's a strange kind of experience, because you go with about 100 people to some house far away from civilization. Well, there's not that much space in Germany, but you feel kind of to be in a laboratory. You're there for a whole week. You don't leave that house, and you work on projects that are. There's no topic besides do something together and have fun. But the whole process of developing that collaborative design.
So there's no directive. There's just go to this house.
Well, you probably shouldn't.
Fun.
Well, you probably shouldn't fight with other people. And there's, of course, some kind of there's rules of how to behave, and there is a basic plan of how this could be going on.
But like activities-wise, there's no specific activity that you're being directed towards. You're just...
Yeah. Well, you should learn how to play with children, because that's necessary for that work later. And that's basically the main thing. Apart from that, it's planning with each other, but to do that, of course, you need some kind of organization, and therefore you meet in these groups of 10 people, 14 people, to talk about what you could do. And you start by something that is pretty similar to design thinking processes. You start with experience mapping. You try to look at what you find interesting right now, which is hard to explain, but if I would do that with you right here in this room, we could go around and look at the map that is hanging over there that links all the people at Milieu, and then maybe something comes up out of there because you see there is Martin who did the casino workshop, and you link it with something else. And maybe there's something else in the room that you could add to that. And in the end, you have a bunch of terms that grasp somehow the ideas you got. And then you associate that with something else and let other people have another look, enrich these terms. And maybe at some point, you kind of have an idea what to do in about 3 hours, and that's deciding with like I like that. Then you have rounds where you say I don't like that, and it's hard to explain because it's so.
Give an example of something that came out of that. Yeah.
So once I built the framework out of wood, and we did our own TV productions, which were basically a very tiny theater. Another time I was in a Jamaican bob team, so maybe you have seen Cool Runnings. I guess this is the inspiration for that. Another time I did a trial for someone who stole some fairy tale creature. And also, my very first time I translated Facebook and all the social media pages in pen and paper format.
So there really were no guidelines. It was really whatever you wanted to create, you could create. Okay. And so, and what you were doing, what you're talking about is prototyping.
Yeah. We were prototyping before that, but also these kinds of projects are, in a way, a prototype for sessions these teenagers will have with their groups. And, of course, we are constantly prototyping for how we can arrange that in the best way, because even if there's no rules, you need some guidance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Taking their experiences with corporate ethnography and prototyping as a starting point, Verena and Florian went on to describe the design and ethnography workshop they held here in the lab, and Florian finally gave us a prototype for a definition of ethnography.
Well, in order to bring back or to give ethnography a material component that it is often lacking, we thought it would be best, especially considering that we can't explain ethnography because there's not one definition and there's not one way to do it. We wanted you to engage in design exercises and then develop your own take on ethnography or your own way to do it. So I hope that was successful. How was it for you?
It was successful for me. I it's so funny because this is something we grapple with on the podcast all the time, and I've straight up asked people what ethnography is, and nobody really has an answer. It's a difficult question.
I have.
You do? Oh my gosh! Oh. Okay, I want to hear it. What is ethnography, Florian?
So I will now.
Hegel says.
No, I will say something really brief, which is definitely wrong because it cannot grasp everything that ethnography might be, but it might give us an idea, and I think that's kind of how prototypes work. So how about ethnography is the science of how to understand each other?
Yes. I accept. And Maddie?
Do we have a choice? It's the first answer we get.
No, well, Cheda gave us an answer.
Yeah, that's true.
Let's make this the prototype.
Yes.
The thing with these kinds of prototypical accounts is that once you place it, once you position it in the room, be it materially or just semantically, it's hard to get beyond that. You have to work now with that. Speaking now philosophy of science, maybe it's not so much Popper that you refute everything there, but it's more like Quine, this other major figure in the early philosophy of science, that you adjust and tinker with that what is already in place, much more pragmatic.
Okay. So maybe you could describe for everybody what we did in the afternoon that day.
So Murray Pearson, who is a awesome handyman from the Montreal-based Helios makerspace, he joined us for the afternoon, and he instructed us in a design exercise where we took small foam boards and created inlets for toolboxes. And the little tools that we needed to accommodate into these inlays, they had very specific shapes, so it was quite difficult to accommodate all these little thingies.
Yeah, they were all
different
sizes.
Yes. Yeah, and some of these approaches, some of these prototypes turned out very pragmatic. We had a couple of engineers there, and you could definitely tell very pragmatic approaches to do that, and very good ones at that. And we also had a very artistic approach, so they tried to make it as pretty, as artsy as possible.
Okay, so here we are. We're live in the ethnography lab, and we're just in the middle of the ethnography and design workshop, and we're making prototypes for these bits for machinery. And who am I here with?
Anne-Marie Mulumba. I'm an undergrad student in design at Concordia University.
And I'm also here with
Ross Hodis. I am a member of Helios Makerspace.
Right, and the workshop today is being led by Murray from Helios Makerspace. And right now we're just making these prototypes to hold... What are they again? What are the bits?
They're machinist jacks. They're small devices which are used to support work inside a milling machine if you're doing work with cutters and steel and stuff, to support the work against the forces of cutting.
All right, so basically we're like making these little contraptions to hold screws out of pieces of foam. And so what are you doing right now, Anne-Marie?
Basically right now we're trying to figure out a way to place the elements on our foam, I guess.
Yeah, because they're kind of like, we've come up with this triangle shape. And so Anne-Marie is just drawing right now. How come you're drawing?
I'm drawing because I'm a very visual person. I need to see it before I actually make a decision and choose which one is best.
Right. Yeah, and you're also a graphic designer,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
So we're just trying to cut all of these things out and figure it out. Yes. And we were all working in small teams, like teams of 3, and working together to come up with a design for this thing. And we also had sort of a secret ethnographic mission that we were doing. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect?
Mm-hmm. Each of the participants got a secret ethnographic mission and was tasked to do an ethnography on his reflections of this particular aspect. So aspects were, what was it, Florian?
We had social dynamics, decision-making and turning points, and materiality,
and
infrastructure, tools.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then we all came together after we had finished designing. So it was kind of, we were all sort of secretly observing and doing ethnographies while we were...
You each had like a theme or something you had to observe that nobody else knew about?
Yes,
right.
Okay.
Yes.
We tried to give a focus so we wouldn't let that get too widespread what we would gather in the end.
Yeah, and to keep it sort of like not sort of low key, like so that it wouldn't be a distraction.
Did you get to share those observations at the end?
Yes.
Yes.
At the end, we did a little exercise where everybody shared their observations, and I also observed the participants while they were doing the design exercise. So it was very interesting to see that the more technical-minded people, they were more focused on designing and prototyping, while one of the members of the ethnography lab, she was very much focused on her ethnography and let the others do the design work. So I found that very interesting that everybody fell back onto what was most comfortable. Yes.
But there was also aspects of why people behaved like that apart from their professions, I think.
Yes. There were a couple surprises. I think social science people are very much interested in actually using their hand to make something materially. That was something that attracted us too. So, yes, our hands, they really just only see the keyboard. So doing something and then seeing the result immediately can be really fascinating.
Yes.
What I liked about the discussion afterwards was, so we started with the category social dynamics, then changed to decisions, turning points, and ended with materiality. And it was difficult to focus on the narrations we had with the first two topics. It got more easy from social dynamics to decisions because there were clearer points that structured the narration and made it comparable. But eventually with tools, materials, I found it pretty easy to follow the narrations and, to empathize, to comprehend also the things that have been said before in this group.
Maybe that was because the social dynamics category was fairly broad and maybe not quite so like tools is sort of maybe an easier thing to discuss. I don't know that the topics kind of went from like broader to sort of more focused and more like I don't know. Yeah.
I definitely agree.
I think we have all these different notions about let it be sociological categories, let it be something else. But with tools, we are referring to something we all can look at. And therefore, maybe our interpretations or our narrations don't differ that widely.
Do you think the ethnographic component, the missions, was that a successful part of the workshop for you both?
Definitely.
Yeah, you'd have to decide, I guess, because you were one of the participants.
I also enjoyed the conversation, but and because I mean you planned the activity, so I'm wondering if it was what you were hoping, or if maybe it was a surprise, or.
Well, in the end, it's always a surprise, but
of course.
We had a very motivated, very engaged little group there. So I think that's what, in the end, made it a success.
Do you think that there was a connection made between that ethnographic practice and the design practice? Like, do you think we really were able to, like, bridge those two things together?
I think
in the workshop, right? It's a tall order.
Yeah. And the time slot was really small too, so that was kind of difficult. But I could tell that some people were much more focused on getting their hands dirty than on doing the actual ethnography. So that was one, yes. That was one difficulty.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think there's more than one aspect of bringing that together.
Yeah.
Like we had comments about how it worked out, writing notes down during the design process and the difficulties there. I think another aspect might be just getting more sensible for what is at stakes or what is going on during a design process, which is also part of an ethnography, not the written part, but and third, I think we've also discussed the materiality of our note taking, but I think we could have expanded a little more on that with a little more time, because the way we are constructing our reports, our ethnographies, might be also kind of a design.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and this was very much just like scribble down a few notes. It wasn't a formal exercise. So what, if you were going to do it again, would there be things that you would change?
We would definitely make it a 2-day event at the least. What do you think, Florian?
I think I would like to especially expand on that last part, on how do we design our ethnographies. And maybe we could show field notes to each other as a little exercise and talk about what we like. Maybe also about, well, there's more and more ethnographic accounts in group work or reading each other's notes, I guess, and therefore it might be interesting to decipher what your partners are writing about. And
absolutely, and maybe it doesn't have to be notes either. It could have been like one of the highlights for me. I was telling Anne-Marie earlier was the talk that Ida gave. And she was talking about the project that she worked on with the Post-it notes and putting Post-it notes. And I mean, I think, some people took pictures while we were doing the design of these objects. And so that's like another ethnographic method that we didn't look at any pictures. Yes. And I had my recording device with me, and I took, so it might have been, it might be interesting to like explore the design of an ethnography outside of like just field notes or a report. Yeah,
ethnography offers many weapons and would be worthwhile to explore others, I guess.
Okay, so we're back and we finished our prototype. I'm back with Anne-Marie and Ross. So how did you guys have fun?
Yeah, lots of fun.
I actually had quite a bit of fun.
Yeah, I had fun too, and it was really like we just had a little bit of a reflection circle, and I did say I didn't know you guys and it was tentative, but I do feel like over the course of making this thing, it was fun to get to know you guys, and there was that sort of process of getting to know each other was really fun for me. So
exactly, and it was only an hour or something that we had to work together, but I feel like we kind of got to understand each other's and laugh a little bit as well. So
yeah, we did laugh.
Yeah, we can always relate.
Yeah.
I always think about it as kind of like a first date. There's a great way to displace your vulnerability into a project that kind of takes away from any awkwardness you might feel about meeting someone new.
True, yes.
Yeah.
Which is good dating tip for your first date. Do an activity.
Something
Yeah, totally. So, okay, so how were some of the takeaways for you guys from today?
I think that I think it's always important to remember how kind of accidents can kind of lead you in a great way. So we had a design that we were committed to, and then in that moment where we saw the rotation on the design from Murray, we were like, oh, yeah, that's actually a way better way to do it. I think we all kind of clicked in that one moment. Yeah. So it was a very organic, but also just an unexpected way to facilitate a design process.
Yeah, absolutely. How about for you?
I feel like I learned that anyone can contribute. It doesn't matter if you're the one building or drawing or just talking, saying anything, because you don't know if that thing will influence or inspire the other person. So there's always an element of contribution. It doesn't matter what exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, you guys. It was really great to meet you and to make our prototype. I think we had the best one, personally, but go Team Triangle.
I believe so, yeah.
And if people want to check out our design, they can go to our Best Concordia Instagram page or Facebook page, and we're going to post pictures. So get on top of that. Yo. Yay. Okay, bye, guys.
Joining for groups?
I think so. I also had a chance at the workshop to talk to Desiree Foerster from the University of Potsdam in Berlin about the workshop and her own research. Now, if you've been following along with the podcast, you might remember last episode's interview with Alejandra when I awkwardly tried to describe Desiree's work around embodiment and how small environmental changes can impact our lives. And I think we should give Desiree the opportunity to explain it herself. It's not. But here we are in the ethnography lab, and I'm at this design and ethnography workshop here. And now I am speaking with, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
My name is Desiree Foerster.
And Desiree, where are you here from?
I'm from the University of Potsdam in Germany, and I'm a PhD student, and I got the invitation to participate in this great workshop. So I'm very excited to be here.
How did you get invited?
It's, well, you know someone who knows someone, that's how it is. And we went to a social studies of science conference in Boston recently, where my colleague met Verena, who's one of the organizers of this workshop. And Verena invited my colleague Hinet, and Hinet invited me, so I'm here.
Amazing. And so we're on lunch now, and we've had the morning. So what were some of the takeaways for you from this morning? Did you have maybe a top 3 highlights from the morning?
Oh, yeah. So for me, the highlights of the morning were that, first of all, I realized that I'm not the only one working very interdisciplinary, and that bringing together different kinds of knowledges and backgrounds can be very fruitful. And also the approaching design as something that opens up new experiences to topics is something that is also for my own research very important. And I was very happy to learn that this seems to be also a central point in the research of this group.
Now, can you just remind me again what your work centers around?
So my background is in philosophy and media studies, and my dissertation is about processes of embodiment that enter the design of novel environments that make us hopefully a little bit more sensitive towards the different interrelations we have with our environment, and maybe even have an impact on the way how we act in our environment, become, for example, more aware of the use of our resources, etc. And I'm planning to conduct an experiment myself where I'm going to work together with designers and neuroscientists, where I want to use design as a philosophical tool in order to test my assumptions.
And what kinds of objects do you look at in terms of the design? Is there anything in particular that you're interested in?
Well, interestingly, it's not really objects. It's the opposite, because I'm interested in pre-perceptual experience. So I'm looking at, for example, thermoception, so the way how we perceive temperature, and atmospheres, and how also light and haptic feedback can influence our experience of a space. So I'm actually looking not at objects, but at the non-representable side.
The embodied experiences that we have. And then, so I know nothing about this, so if you don't mind helping me out. So from that embodied experience to the design process,
yes.
What's the link? Is that something that you can kind of conceptualize?
I will try. I mean, I work with Alfred North Whitehead, who is a process philosopher, and with him I'm trying to nail down the different layers of perception or experience that lead to a conscious experience or to a conscious perception of space. And I'm trying to experiment how can we bring these different modes, how can we amplify these different modes of experience in a way that they also have a different effect on how we relate. So, for example, the experiment that I'm planning will involve a virtual environment where you encounter a plant and you are invited to participate in the metabolic circle of the plant. And we will work with haptic feedback, with thermoception, and different ways to make this interrelation with the metabolic circle of the plant experienceable.
So what is the metabolic circle of a plant?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I'm already so much into my... I also had to read about it and learn it because, as I said before, I'm I'm a humanities scholar. Plants are amazing because they take the carbon dioxide and transform it into CO2.
Photosynthesis.
Exactly, they do photosynthesis, which is very important for us as humans. Plants do have a huge impact on our well-being, for example, but we are usually not aware of that. And I want to create a situation where both the plant and the person encountering the plant is put under heat stress. So the environment heats up, which has an effect on the plant and the photosynthesis capacity of the plant. And then also, following that.
Does it increase the photosynthesis activity of the plant?
No, it decreases, So plants cannot... there's probably plants that can until a certain threshold, but usually after a certain threshold is we arrive at, then the plant slow down the photosynthesis.
So when a person encounters a plant and the person also has been exposed to heat, this is what your experiment is, right? So you're like, what will happen under those conditions to the person experiencing the sort of space with the plant? Is that sort of a fair assessment?
Direction, yeah. I want to have different modes of experience, or different study conditions. In one study condition, the person will only see the plant thriving and then dying and not really knowing why. And then there's another study condition where the visual representation is... that we add also the thermoception, the experience of the heating up of the room, and then also experimenting with haptic feedback, and it's getting a bit more complicated.
Wow.
But,
No, this is very interesting. So this morning there was a little bit of discussion around ethics in terms of design and introducing social science perspectives and ethnography in particular into the design process, and that there's maybe potential for things to be misused for like corporate neoliberal interests or what have you. Is there any of that sort of stuff in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I think for me it's very important to always figure out how much should people in the use of technologies, or for example in their inhabitation of space, which I'm interested in, how much should they be aware actually of what the technology is doing, like how much they do participate in the process. Because, for example, if you think of designing homes that want to be more sustainable and are equipped with like very high technological networks, the people are not really aware what the technology is doing. So the technology is acting for them, which leads probably most likely to less or a more sustainable use of resources. But that doesn't change the awareness of the people and how, But on the other hand, if you make the technology too prominent, this also might then have too big of an impact on the people's lives, so that they would not be really interested in having this kind of environment at their homes. So you have to somehow really balance. And I'm interested in how can we create learning environments that give us the possibility to have an impact on our experience and awareness of space without becoming too prominent and too intrusive. But of course, this is obviously connected to many ethical questions, because if you go to a supermarket, for example, you would realize, like, if you look around, how much this pre-perceptive experience is already in use in order to make us buy certain things or not and consume. So these are like things or phenomena that we are already surrounded with. But the question is, like, how can we make us also aware of these?
The little things, the literary wings that take us for a little spin.
That was Willy Dings by Willem Burnaby, and Willem is our first returning musical guest on Best Concordia, and we featured Willem's music last season on episode 3, The Right Constellation, and he is back in our orbit to talk about his new recording studio, Urban Jungle Studio in Montreal, supporting new artists, and his interest in electroacoustics.
Once in a while, we care about the little things, the literary wings that take us.
Well, I first started in composition, but I'm actually finding myself leaning more towards electroacoustics now.
Right, we were talking about this before we started recording.
Yeah, for sure.
So why the electroacoustics?
Well, I recently opened up Urban Jungle Studio.
Cool.
Promote.
Yeah, for sure. Shameless plug.
Yeah.
Urban Jungle Studio, check them out.
Yeah, for sure. And so I've been getting really into recording and just like sound editing, and for a long time I've been really saving up for that equipment, and I realized that I've just been, without me even really knowing, leaning towards electroacoustics and really playing with sound on that degree, on that level.
So what do we mean when we talk about like electroacoustics?
Electroacoustics is like the manipulation of sound, because we have all these various programs now where we can literally take sound waves and manipulate them 100%. We can do anything we want with them. And it's like a revolution in music, especially because artists, for example, I'll just throw one out there that probably a lot of people know, like Skrillex, can take a simple, sine wave and completely make their own unique sound. So not only are they making their own unique song, but the sounds involved are completely unique. They've created the sounds from scratch. Yeah, and they just use their ears to figure out exactly what they're looking for, and a lot of people find it very satisfying because it introduces a whole new side of music,
So, like, what kind of things would you record and then alter to make a new sound? Like, would that it could be anything, right?
It's crazy. Some of the sound gurus out there, can take the and turn it into a snare, a kick, and they made a whole drum set, a choir. They can do
what?
You can take anything and just completely manipulate it. It's wild.
Cool.
I mean, it turns into something that the original sound is completely different. It's nothing like the same, but yeah,
cool.
Yeah, very interesting.
So last year, you were the music that we used was sort of like more kind of like hip hop. There was a lot of like beats and stuff.
For sure.
Is your sound still? The music that you're creating, is it still sort of in that world?
I'm still generating my sound. I mean, I definitely have the hip hop influence from kind of older artists like the Phariside or the Roots or who else, like Pete Rock. And they have like a kind of a neon soul going on, or a jazz influence of some sort. Yeah. So it's kind of a mix of hip hop, that really nice beat that we can kind of groove to, as well as the kind of very advanced or very evolved theory and harmony of these kind of genres like neon soul and jazz, etc.
Yeah, because it is jazzy. Like there's like
for sure,
piano. You're a big
definitely
piano
that
fan.
But ultimately, I'm still finding what I really want to compose. I think we take from people we are inspired by, or genres we're inspired by, and we just start clumping it together, and we try and find arrangements that we really like, to to do something that's unique and pertains to our own expression.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, okay, tell me a little bit more about your studio. What sparked that? Why you were just like?
I guess I wanted to. I mean, it started off with composing. I've always wanted to be able to create my own music, but unless you're doing a live performance, or you have a band. You need to find a way to be able to create kind of a full band or something similar type feel, and you need the skills like production to be able to do that. So to be able to use a DAW program on a computer and use these softwares to be able to create music and to understand that world as a musician.
Right.
I mean, I think there's so many people now. The technology is so readily available. There's so many young artists who are, they're recording their own stuff. They're putting their own stuff out there through their own means, rather than going to recording studios. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's
I guess
it seems very accessible. Like you don't really you could on an iPhone.
Oh yeah. I mean,
create
you can a
whole song or
totally,
whatever, right?
Totally. I mean, it's there. It's totally there, and it's just the depth you want to go to. Also, yeah.
So your studio was sort of like you were wanting to create music, and so the studio was a way of producing your own stuff.
Exactly.
And had you been working with other artists where you were like, I see that there's a need for this, where I can like help them out and produce stuff with them?
Yeah. Once I started gaining more knowledge on it and being able to produce a cleaner sound and gain the some of the skills for producing music, it showed me that there's so many young artists out there, so many people who want to be heard, who want to be up on the web, but are looking for something maybe more professional grade or a cleaner sound or something, and it just takes those few skills to start leaning into that.
Yeah.
And so,
are you working with some people right now?
Yeah, I have several open projects right now, and I kind of balance between, I guess Urban Jungle Studio is really, I want to offer affordable recording and producing for all. So whether that's you can't afford anything or you can, afford to help out the studio, it's whatever you have to offer. I'm willing to kind of dive in on a project and help get your sound out there. Right.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And how can people find you?
You can find me. I'm yet to create a Facebook page, but God, I actually am still working on that my promotion.
We will. You let us know, and we will link on our Facebook page, and we'll link to all of this stuff so that people can find you. But it's called Urban Jungle Studio.
Yes.
How'd you come up with the name for that?
Well, I'm really going for like an urban jungle. So like my apartment is completely decked out with all sorts of jungly plants and whatnot. So when you're in the studio, you really feel like you're in the jungle, right?
Cool.
But it's also really accessible because it's right downtown, and it's a great place to be just for making connections and bringing people in. So Urban Jungle Studio. There you go.
Finally, we are going to chat with Ida Toft, who is one of the presenters at the Design and Ethnography Workshop. Now, Ida is a PhD student in the Indi, or interdisciplinary program here at Concordia, and I was very taken with the talk that she gave at the workshop, so we invited her to come in last week to talk to us here in the Ethnography Lab, and I was able to ask her more about her master's work in Denmark, where she and her colleague used Post-it notes as an ethnographic tool in game design.
I studied, I never studied game design.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I studied at the IT University in Copenhagen, which has a very, very good game design program, but I was not in that one. I was in the design program. So that's much more within like HCI, like human-computer interaction, and user-centered design, participatory design. So that's more my background.
Okay.
And then I became more and more, I became more interested in games, and also I think that all the way through my master's, I was always interested in games, but I was always interested in the kind of odd games, the games that the people in the games program didn't consider games or considered bad games or
the misfit games.
Yeah. But still there was some people in the games program that was very interested in what, it wasn't just me, it was like me and a few friends, and by the end it was me and my master thesis partner or collaborator, Amani Nassim. So we worked very closely together.
Yep.
And we made friends with the game design people, students, and became more and more kind of involved in what they were doing. And there are also people in that group who does very experimental things.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, maybe you could tell me a little bit about your master's thesis, because this was how my introduction to you was through a presentation you gave on that work, and I was really taken with it. So,
right.
What was the master's thesis all about?
Well, okay, so the master's thesis work was, it was more in the field of interaction design and HCI, user-centered design. So we had chosen to work with teenagers and the home. So we started out by interviewing teenagers. We interviewed, I think the first round we interviewed 9 teenagers, and then from those kind of pilot interviews we narrowed down into the teenagers' relationship to their families, especially communication. Because it's a time when a lot of things are changing very, very fast, and the family is very important space for having kind of that support and that ground and all this, like all these new things you are presented to during those years. But at the same time, I think it's also a space where a lot of traditions, a lot of old rules, like you're still kind of the little kid who can't talk about like the things you're actually experiencing out there, and like how do you introduce new topics like sex and menstruation and drugs and cigarettes, alcohol. Like how do you introduce these new topics into a social group, basically, where there are very strict rules about how you talk and what you talk about. But it seemed very important for the teenagers we talked to. So then we made 2 concepts basically around that, where one was more, I think, a speculative, or it wasn't kind of technically implementable, but it was a clay frame, we called it, that has, so it's like a frame that has a clay kind of material in it, and it is wirelessly connected to a clay frame at another place. So we were talking about how when siblings move out, and then the sibling who is left home is actually, losing their very best friend and their often closest relationship in life, and this is not actually talked about,
Right, yeah.
So we were talking about how do we keep this relationship going without it being too demanding or having to call up, because they don't do that for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah.
Or no, I mean some do, but not everyone. So we made this like very subtle thing, like a clay kind of thing to work with while you're studying. It can be on your desk, and you can kind of poke into it, and then it will create the same shapes on the other side.
On the other side, oh, cool.
I think now this would be technically possible.
Yeah.
At the time, it was maybe a bit not
quite there yet.
Yeah, not quite there. Yeah. So that was the one thing we made, and the other thing was a game, like a location-based game, where people could kind of make questions about themselves or about each other, and they could place them around in the city. So they could kind of strategically place them where, if the mom was on the way from home, or you could place it where family members very rarely did. So you could can make all kinds of questions. Some are maybe more daring than others, or more risky than others.
Yes. More revealing.
So then maybe you can put that, somewhere where it's very unlikely that anyone comes out, but it still makes a difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you can. So the mechanic was kind of that you make a question and then you make 3 possible answers, of which only one is right. Mm-hmm. But it might be that 2 of them is right, Mm-hmm. But then you're testing out what you think, like what your family think about you or what your family know about you,
right.
So you're testing out, like, what if I have put this as the right answer, what would the reaction be? And so we really made like a space where you could play with truth and false information.
So what would be an example of one of the riskier questions that people came up with?
That could be one that was like, what did I do today? I colored my hair red, I got a tattoo, or I was late for class. Or something.
Yeah. Yes. That could be risky. I can see disclosing that could be risky for a teenager. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And then that project is where, and this is the other thing that I was super fascinated by in the presentation you gave, your method for dealing with all of the sort of like information that you had gathered from running these prototypes. You used Post-it notes.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit
Post-it
about that.
notes is very overused in design.
Is it? Okay.
In design culture.
Oh, really?
One of the things that so this seminar that you're talking about
mm-hmm.
was about ethnography and design,
mm-hmm.
and within user-centered design and HCI, there has been a use of ethnography since the 80s, when the computer started entering the home, basically. But then also because it's a very engineering-heavy field, so these ethnographic methods are always kind of being changed into much more like engineering, fitting engineering practices, I guess. Mm-hmm. So then there's constantly this question about, pushback on like, how do we actually use the richness and like the qualities that ethnographic research can
mm-hmm.
give to design, and especially because we are not ethnographers. That's too much to be both a professional designer and a professional ethnographer.
Right, yeah.
So how do you kind of merge these two fields in a most productive way? But then we discovered, I guess, so we used a method. What can I say? The way that we worked through our ethnographic data, instead of like transcribing everything, which is very often done, and I have done it as well as a RA, we kind of just wrote down on Post-it notes and very big pens, like markers.
Mm-hmm.
We wrote down keywords, and we put them up. So each interview would have one kind of sheet with all the keywords from this interview, and also our reflections,
mm-hmm.
but it wouldn't be word by word. It would be keywords so that we would remember, and we would we would more kind of think about. It would be much more flexible for us to get new ideas and also to move around. So over time we would maybe rearrange all the Post-it notes into themes, mm-hmm. or into problems, into questions. So we would constantly kind of rework the data in this way. And that we found worked really well with design practice, because design is also, you talk about a designerly way of thinking. Mm-hmm. So design is a research, I don't know if, that's me calling it a research method. I think so, because
mm-hmm.
every time you have an idea and then you make it, concrete, or maybe you sketch it out and then you realize all the things that didn't work about it. Or like in our case, we would have an idea and then that idea would bring out new aspects of the data that we hadn't kind of thought about before.
Mm.
And then we would use that new data to make new design. So it's really a way that we the analysis process, instead of stopping before the design process starts, which is the normal thing to do. Mm-hmm. You kind of have a design phase, and then you start you have an ethnography phase, then you make a report with the analysis, and you have the 10 bullet points of implications for design, and then, you start the design. We integrated it much more, and that way the design practice became a kind of analysis tool as well.
Right. Did that process, that integration process, was it more of like an exercise in method, or did it come to some sort of like conclusion or at the end result, I guess is what I'm trying to ask.
So the end result was the two concepts.
Was the concepts, yes.
And also the method.
Is it something that you would use again as a way of working?
I think that. So I haven't worked with ethnographic data since this project. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, I haven't. The other thing that was amazing was that we were two. Mm-hmm. So it has that constant dynamic that, like, Amani would see things that I didn't see. And I grew up in a Danish culture, so I have been a Danish teenager myself,
right,
where Amani is not from Denmark. So she would see completely other things. And
where was she from?
She's from the Maldives.
Okay.
And also our supervisor was from Brazil. Mm. So we just had, a lot of different perspectives, and so we would, always see different things, and you move things around, and I think when you're working on your own, things can get a bit more stuck, a bit more frozen.
Yes, can relate. Yeah, absolutely.
But I think, if I worked, we will see. Yeah, I would use it again, like, definitely. But I'm using the idea that design is a way of getting to know things, a way of researching, or a way of investigating.
Yes.
And a way of realizing and noticing. I think that's really kind of crucial points.
Yeah,
things
absolutely.
To learn, yeah.
Well, beautiful people, we hope you enjoyed this episode. We tinkered all night on this one to get it right for you. No prototypes, only finished products. Huge thanks to our guests this week: Florian Tichy, Verena Eireiner, Anne-Marie Mulumba, Ross Hodis, Desiree Foerster, and Ida Toft. Music this week by Willem Burnaby from Urban Jungle Studio. This week's episode was produced by Chris Millett, Pauline Hobanks, and Juan Pablo Neri. Next week, the return of Anne-Marie Turcotte, who has been away on assignment. Big love, as always, to our friends at the Ethnography Lab, the Milieu Institute, and the Speculative Life Research Cluster. We love you guys. I'm your host, Johnny B., and until next time, best Concordia.